first item on the agenda, do we have any bill introductions? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to introduce a bill, RS number 2596. It deals with the constraints on general fund investing for insurance companies.
All right. Is there a motion to introduce the bill or a second? Second by Representative Ballard. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Bill is introduced. Any further bill introductions? Mr. Durkinson.
Good morning, Chairman Waymaster, members of the committee. My name is Sean Jurgensen. I'm with the Judicial Branch. I'm seeking introduction of a bill this morning that would shift deposit of those fees that fund core Judicial Branch operations to the State General Fund. This is part of the proposal that the Chief Justice highlighted in her State of the Judiciary, and the RS number is 2558.
All right. Any questions for Sean? I would go ahead and move to have the bill introduced as second by Representative Wolfmore. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The bill is introduced.
Thank you.
Any further bill introductions? All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to the first major item on the agenda this morning, and we have the pleasure of having the Secretary from the Department of Agriculture, Mike Beam, here to give us an update on the agriculture in the state of Kansas. Welcome to committee, Mr. Secretary. Red light on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I think this is the third year I've had a chance, an opportunity to come talk to this group, and I always appreciate that opportunity. Again, I'm Mike Beam with the Kansas Department of Agriculture. Also with me today is Kellen Leaps, our Chief Financial Officer, and our Deputy Secretary, Kelsey Olson. We thought we would highlight some of the challenges and some of the positive things that occurred in ag, and mostly those that we were directly involved in. I have, I think, a 7-page document that I'm going to work from, so I'm not, as I told you before, I'm not going to read it all, and I'm not going to go through all the points. I just thought I'd highlight some of these and hopefully have time to entertain any questions or comments that you might have. But one of the statutory responsibilities the Secretary of Ag has, it says promote Kansas agriculture. So I have an opportunity to go speak to a lot of groups, not as much the last 18 months, but it's ramping up. And I get the opportunity to talk about the impact that Kansas agriculture has on this economy. And as I indicated, if you look at the 72 ag, food, and food processing sectors, it's about a little over $47 billion direct output in the Kansas economy. The top 10 sectors are listed in one of the attachments I have if you're interested.
Excuse me, Carlin. I am trying to zoom into the meeting for appropriations. And
Representative Carlin, I will take note of that. Please mute your microphone.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
Yes. There's a total economic contribution of $67 billion, but about 12% of the state's workforce is related to those 72 ag sectors. One of the bright spots for Kansas ag is, agriculture is a pretty big player in the total amount of exports, but Kansas ag exports continue to climb. We've so far through the October of 2021, we've had about $4 billion in exports through October, which is over $1 billion more than 2020. So we think when the final numbers come in for 2021, you'll see a significant increase in the value of agriculture-oriented exports just from the state of Kansas. And a lot of that increases come from live animals, edible vegetables, our grains, and some other food processing products. But, this is due to a lot of factors. It's due to perhaps more favorable trade agreements that have now been phased in and in place. And also, there's just a lot of efforts not just by the state of Kansas through our department, Department of Commerce, but the private sector as well, have presence in some of these countries and are really working hard to grow. There's a lot of demand worldwide. getting the products there is many times the challenge. So that's a bright spot. We'll try to make sure to report when we get the final numbers, which will be probably another 60 days for the calendar year 2021. Of course, the last part of 2021, we dealt, as many people did, with the devastating fires that occurred on December 15th. That's had a significant impact across the state. A lot of the focus has been, there are about 161,000 acres, and so if you look at the map, I don't think I provided that, but there's areas all through central and western Kansas where pockets of wildfires occurred. The biggest one, though, 120,000 acres of that 160,000 was in that four-county fire, which is right in your area, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Rogers are very acutely aware of that. So that occurred, of course, on December 15, and there's a lot of people that kind of come deployed to help respond to that. I was impressed with the local emergency manager. I was there a few days afterwards, and he and his EMS director were holding, they were out visiting, working, and putting out the last part of the fires, but they had a very extensive list of needs that people had, assessing the damages, but the outpouring of help and support that was coming elsewhere was overwhelming and very, very humbling. And so they were trying to match up and do a really good job of match up, who needed the hay, who needed something hauled, where was the immediate needs for housing and so forth. But the one aspect that we did at the Department of Ag is try to work with a lot of the people that were trying to respond and have a one-shop kind of a clearinghouse on our website for information. So if you went to our website, and you still can today, there's a Kansas Recovery Resources link, and it has the list of especially federal programs that are available, several programs through USDA. And so we try to keep that updated, and we had that up and running fairly good time. I would say that what we're dealing with is, of course, recovery, physical recovery. A lot of animals lost, a tremendous amount of fencing, some homes, outbuildings, hay supplies, feed supplies, trucks and so forth. But folks now, of course, are dealing with the emotional toil of this. And I've got several paragraphs on page 2 that talks about our Ag Stress program. And Deputy Secretary Olson took the lead on putting this together. And the timing was really impeccable. We started putting this together in the fall of 2019. And then, of course, we got into the spring of 2020, tremendous amount of stress. And we saw that this website it's not just Department of Ag. It's meant to be a collaboration of existing private and other public resources that deal and can help and understand the agricultural sector and some out-of-state resources. But the visits to that website corresponded right with the real pinch periods of stress. We saw quite a few hits, early, mid-2020. The ag economy really started picking up in 2020 in the fall, and the number of hits dropped off substantially. But we also noticed a good degree of hits that occurred, late January and late December and early January after the fire as well. And of course, we tried to make sure that push that out and made sure people were aware of it. So one of the things that's occurred is we received a grant from USDA. It was an earmark in the Farm Bill for ag stress, and I think many states received it, but we received about $500,000. And that emphasis is going to be on making sure, promoting, making people aware of this resource, trying to destigmatize the mental health stress that does occur amongst rural people, who people are very independent and strong. Doesn't mean that you don't have stresses that can occur. So you'll see much more about that largely through social media, that being available. And on top page 3, I've listed all the partners that have helped put the website together. You know, there's agricultural groups, there's even you know, KDHE, Department of Aging and Disability Service, and Department for Children and Families. If you have thoughts about it, if you go to it, if you have suggestions, we're always welcome. We want to make sure that that's timely, accurate, and appropriate information. I mentioned in my prepared remarks a little bit about the Securing Local Food System grant. I may have talked about this a year ago, but we kind of wrapped that up in the first part of 2021. We worked with recipients of about $12.8 million in those grants. I can get you the breakdown. I think I might have provided it last year, but you know, this went to smaller grocery stores, a lot of small meat processing plants, churches, pantries, specialty crop growers. So it was quite welcome. It's really helped a lot of these small businesses and support organizations, you know, ramp up their ability to respond to local food requests. One of the annual events that we've had each year is the Ag Growth Summit. We went virtual with that last August. And at the bottom of page 3, top of page 4 are some of the highlights that we've gleaned as the needs to sustain and grow agriculture, particularly in Kansas. It probably is appropriate to many other areas. Workforce development, all of you hear from your constituents. It doesn't matter what business it is. That's a key factor. You know, support for successful business development, a lot of interest in making sure our, you know, our extension service and educational system is available to help respond. More research, the infrastructure. You know, we depend on a pretty strong infrastructure with our road, bridges, railroads, waterways to move ag products, and that should always be a priority. And then the last item on that list on the top of page 4, the one thing that we always want to try to remember that to be prepared for is in the event if we have a foreign animal disease outbreak. We saw what a human disease outbreak or pandemic can be. We know other countries have had foreign animal disease outbreaks that's just devastated their food supply and wrecked the economy for their agricultural producers. So it has been and continues to be a priority to be prepared in the event of a foreign animal disease response. And also working with producers, particularly the larger producers, on individually developing secure food supply plans so that they can implement that if we have one, and then still be able to enter the marketplace. I noted a little bit, that falls within the Division of Animal Health. I won't go into all that I've included in the prepared remarks, other than it tells you a little bit more detail about, you know, African swine fever as one of the kind of on the forefront that we're watching. I did note that in the budget, the governor's budget was an enhancement for the animal facility inspection program. That's something that we've been asking for and seeking, and I think this will help us immensely in boosting the response and credibility of that program. Our Division of Ag Marketing has been very busy as well throughout the year. There's a couple of programs. We implement a specialty crop block grant program that's USDA provides money to states. So in 2021, we received about $1 million, and that went out to specialty crop applicants. And then there's also an organic certification cost share program that we administered. Because of the federal bills that passed in COVID relief, there was an additional round of specialty block grants. So we are in the process of awarding applications for another round, an extra round in late 2021, early 2022. Trade missions is something that we've had to curtail, obviously, but we have had some, particularly reverse trade missions, and it resulted, we had some interest from Philippines. So Kansas did end up exporting some beef embryos into Philippines, and I think we're maybe one of the first states to actually see that occur. One of the most visible programs in ag marketing is From the Land of Kansas. We have a trademark, a lot of emphasis at the Kansas State Fair if you go by our booth in the Pride of the Kansas building. And then the gift box program, I think they sold about 1,000 gift boxes that people would buy and have shipped to the recipients that included, specialty products from the land of Kansas. This program really works well for what I would call small startup, home-based, primarily food businesses, with jellies and popcorn and specialty products, and it's helped people, brand and market their products. On page 5, I would say that our ag laboratory, if we finished construction and moved in March of 2020, about the same time that we shut things down. So it's taken a while to get the equipment calibrated and get it up and get the humidity and all the things you have to have done in a lab. But we're really proud and excited about the lab. It's right next door to our main headquarters in Manhattan. And anytime you're there, if you want to take a tour, we'd be glad to show that to you. We have a lot of they're regulatory programs, but we have a lot of programs that we oversee and administer. The dairy industry, when there's any kind of growth or consideration for milk production or dairy processing, our folks get involved in helping support, and the needs that, understanding the needs that they're going to need. But we did play at least a small role in the final recruitment of Hillmar cheese that's going to be coming into Dodge City. One of the programs, our largest program as far as employees, would be food safety. I don't think many Kansans know that the entity, the people that inspect all food service, cafes, restaurants, bars that serve food, schools, lodging, they're all licensed and inspected by folks within our agency and our food science. The one area on top of page 6, I would highlight meat and poultry. So you may recall in the spring of 2020, a lot of the shelves were getting empty of some very essentials, including meat. And it created much more demand and interest in consumers. Number one, can I acquire meat locally from local processors? Producers who were looking for a source to have their animals processed and even start marketing direct to consumers. There wasn't much capacity in the small state-inspected meat processing, but the market was so strong that we've seen a big demand. And we've actually, I think, seen 17 new licensees come on board, and we're dealing with another 20 people who are very serious and far along in putting in a new or expanded meat processing plant. So that's really put a load on our meat inspection staff, because they have to have us there to do the inspection. So we've been able to keep up. They probably have had to make some adjustments in their preferred schedule. But we did put for requests, and the governor did authorize additional funding so we could add 6 meat and poultry inspectors and enhance some of those salaries, because we've had huge turnover in a lot of programs, and this is one of them. I don't think we've had all of our inspectors in place because of attrition, better opportunities in the private sector, and many retirements as well. What I would say about hemp is the legislature has asked us through statute to file an annual report. So attached to one of the documents is the report that our staff has prepared that gives you a pretty good overview of hemp, the status of it, and what's occurred over the last year. I would just say, I would end, I guess, part on Division of Water Resources. Continues to be a lot of demands on our staff to, that's the permitting of water appropriations, the change in use, the change of location. And so we've had, lots of demands, particularly out west in, redrills and modifications to the permitting. But there's a lot of interest and seems to be some momentum on the conservation front. And as I've highlighted in the Sheridan 6 local enhanced management area that the legislature authorized this several years ago, they started in 2013. They started out with a target of reducing water use by 20%, but their actual water use reduction has been 30%. So it's pretty exciting to see what they're able to do with using less and extending the life of that aquifer by maybe as much as 25 years by reducing and being more efficient. There's some other areas of the state that are trying to implement this as well, and there's a real quick summary of that on page 7. So with that is a whole separate packet, Mr. Chairman, that I think will provide a lot of information, not just about our budget, but some stats on agriculture. And we do publish economic facts by county, so, the largest crops, the impact. So and I think at Ag Day at some point we'll deliver to all the offices the snapshot of the ag industry by county to you. And if you don't see that, if you think you would like to have that sooner, we could probably get you the last year and try to make sure to get you the 2021 as soon as it's available. But I'm blessed to have a great team at the office. They were very helpful in putting all this information together, and we are ready at any time if you want us to meet with you individually to go over a specific issue or a program that you have an interest in. We'd be glad to do that. And at this time, I'd be happy to respond to any questions or comments that you might have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. First, I want to focus on the wildfires that happened in December of 2021. Obviously, the wounds are still fresh, especially for myself and for Representative Rogers, because our counties were affected. 2 days after the fire, Senator Bowers and I did a tour and saw the devastation that occurred around the small town of Paradise in northwest Russell County. And I would say, just quite simply, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. It was horrific. Seeing all the dead livestock, not only just cattle, but horses, sheep, deer, dogs. I mean, it was just, I wasn't prepared for what I visually saw when I did that tour that day. And just to kind of give you a perspective, I was driving on 281 from Russell to the junction of K18 and 281, which then you go west to Paradise. And about 7 miles before you got to that intersection on 281, you could see the burn marks across the road. That's how fierce that fire was. And 5 days later, I was driving back to Paradise, and you could still see the burn marks on 281. You saw the devastation of homes that had been there for over 100 years burned. Trees still smoldering. And when I spoke to the governor a couple days after the fire, she asked me what it was like, and I'm going to be quite honest. I said it's sheer hell. And that's the best way I can describe it. I don't know if Representative Rogers has any other comments in regards to that. So I guess my first question is, actually the governor was preemptive, and she issued a disaster declaration prior to the fires because she had anticipated it was going to be horrific, which I think it was well beyond what we all thought it was going to be. But can you just give a timeline of how things progressed with the state declaration? And the reason why I say this is because there was a member of our federal delegation that went to Paradise and caused confusion. So can you give the timeline of what the declaration was, when that was, and then when partners from the federal government were asked to assist with the wildfires in that four-county area and in the state of Kansas as a whole?
Well, what I know, and it's a good question also for Division of Emergency Management, but you're right. Prior to December 15th, either the 14th or the 13th, the governor declared a state of emergency, and again had no idea that this kind of fire, but knew that if we had a fire, we didn't want to take the time to go through that process. We wanted to be able to activate the state's resources, including the aircraft. So that was done in advance. And the one thing I learned through this is the state Division of Emergency Management provides support when requested by the local emergency management coordinator. So our staff had communications with the local emergency manager. Are you getting what you need? There was some thought they needed equipment to help bury. They found that locally. So I think the communication, and I think the Division of Emergency Management probably had a lot of challenges. They were asking, how many homes, how many miles of fence, how many power lines, and the emergency management at the local level, they're busy addressing it. So I think the communication was pretty strong, but like I said in my remarks, I was amazed how much they responded and handled it locally. But there are certain trigger levels in dollar values before you get a presidential designation. You have to submit to FEMA. And there's also another USDA designation. And so I think FEMA's, or Division of Emergency Management, has probably submitted some of that data. It's taken a while to collect it, which would include miles of power lines, utilities, just a lot of factors that would be included. So, I mean, from my perspective and my interactions, that's kind of where we're at. We haven't seen, we don't have so many state resources that we can offer as far as dollars. And one of the things that's occurred without any declaration was the USDA programs for compensation for animals, compensation or cost share for fence rebuilding, compensation for loss of feed, which would be hay in this case. So those applications have to be submitted by 30 days after. So by January 15th, everybody will have submitted, hopefully everybody submitted their applications to USDA. But from my vantage point, that's kind of the extent of what I can provide you, but we can get you more information from the other partners if you like.
No, that'd be good. And I know there was a meeting on December 29th in the city of Natoma to kind of coalesce all of those that were affected and to bring in the state resources, which are limited on exactly what we can do, but also the federal partners, so everybody knows exactly what the process is. I was unable to attend that meeting because actually I was ill that day, and I was told by an individual, don't come up here.
They reported that you were watching virtually, though.
I was, yes.
So they made sure all 200 people knew that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I just happened to have the flu that day and couldn't make it. But I know Representative Rogers was there. And so I know a lot of farmers and ranchers just kind of needed that directive on how to process and how to actually know what the proper channels are in trying to get relief. In regards to the state resources, which I kind of said, and I think you kind of said it too, it's limited in a situation like this. So one, what does the state offer? And two, in your opinion, what could the state potentially offer if we would make some changes?
Well, in this case, and the state provided, you know, the firefighting, the aerial support. But in visiting with some of the ranchers, I was there on the Monday afterwards and again on the day of the meeting in Natoma, and the local fire, primarily rural fire departments, but, you know, they pretty much exhausted their resources, lost a truck, and I know that they were anxious to try to be able to get some resources to rebuild in case it happened again in any kind of fire. So probably taking a look at, you know, is the state is the state able to provide more support for some of the local fire departments might be something to consider. Conversations with them anyway about it.
Right. I'm going to shift now.
Okay.
From the wildfires to some other items. Actually, when we were in the CSG Midwest meeting in South Dakota, at lunch, there was a speaker who was talking about how they addressed the food deserts in South Dakota. And you had kind of mentioned it in your comments this morning. And so I actually had research look at it and see, you know, in the state of Kansas with a 60-mile radius from one grocery store to the next, in proximity, what does the food deserts look like in the state of Kansas? And obviously in the central and western part of the state, it's more prevalent. So I guess what is one way that the Department of Ag is trying to address those food deserts in the state of Kansas?
Well, one program that's been in existence that's trying to provide support and education to those who want to start growing food locally, to market locally. And, you know, in addition to those grants that we can administer, we actually put on, you know, some educational sessions. So there seems to be more interest in farmers or maybe part-time farmers that want to expand into the growing of fresh fruits and vegetables that they could market locally. And so we try to provide support for that as that comes up. I think as much as anything, and I'd be interested in seeing that map and having a conversation, but I think as much as anything is trying to help coordinate and collaborate communications with people who are trying to resolve that locally with what we can do to help. But we need to have a welcome having further discussions about that.
Well, and I have that map, so I'm more than welcome to share that with you. Research actually provided that.
There's probably some areas in urban parts of Kansas too, though, not just the rural areas.
It's pretty widespread
Yes.
across the state where we do have some food deserts. So in the marketing aspect, I know From the Land of Kansas was launched a few years ago. I will say, like especially in my area of the state, and I would probably presume that some of the other representatives are in the same situation, there's a lot of people who don't know about it. So what is the marketing aspect in trying to get, you know, local restaurants, local producers aware of From the Land of Kansas? You mentioned that you have a booth at in the Pride of Kansas at the State Fair, but what is the marketing perspective in regards to From the Land of Kansas?
Well, I'll go back and try to get a better handle of how we market the program, make it available. I also know that one of the advantages of working through that program is if they need support from like labeling and food analysis, we have an agreement with Kansas State University with a couple of researchers who have helped individual members From the Land of Kansas maybe make slight modifications to their, if there's some prepared food, make slight modifications, put the label together, do an analysis, and it's not just through Land of Kansas, but through our ag marketing program. Perhaps, and I think as we find people or learn of people that are wanting to do this or doing it, you know, we try to reach out and make sure they are aware that there is From the Land of Kansas program, and it should help them. But we'll go back and look and see just exactly how, I'll find out how we market it now extensively.
All right, I'm kind of interested in see how the marketing perspective is from the land of Kansas. And if you could give an update, commodity prices are doing fairly well at this moment. However, there's also an inflation perspective that is affecting a lot of the farmers and ranchers, and especially when we resort back to the wildfires and reconstructing 5,000 miles of damaged fencing in that area, the cost of goods have gone up.
Yes.
So can you kind of give us an analysis of that?
So yes, commodity prices have strengthened, and on the grain side, and it looks like the livestock sector is poised with the assumptions that we have now to be stronger and better in 2022. But you're exactly right. The inputs are extremely high. Fertilizer, seed is high and difficult to find. So in addition to workforce, labor, the other thing I hear most about is our input costs and availability. So it is challenging. We're going to need high prices to cover these input costs. And we need some timely rains as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you for being here. So if we go to the Division of Animal Health, the increased funding that you're asking for, it's for an attorney and then 2 additional staff positions. Are those inspectors?
For sure, one of them would be, and it'd help us fund an investigator, and which we already have the authority to. We don't have the funding for, and preferably an administrative help as well. We have one person as an admin help.
And this is just for the small animals.
Exactly.
Okay. So with the funding, does that also include in the governor's budget, I guess, does she also include the change in structure, I guess?
No.
Okay. So
but
you don't need the change in structure to...
We are going to ask for the introduction of a bill that addresses the creation of a new division.
Okay.
But that is not in the budget. The budget is to go towards the existing, to go to the Division of Animal Health for the Animal Facilities Inspection Program.
Okay. Will that require additional funding for the new division?
No. No, it's just to set up statutorily the creation of a new division. Our divisions, I think every one of them are in statute. Division of Water Resources, Marketing, Water, oh gosh. The divisions that we have, there's 4 or 5 of them. Right. They're all, pretty much all by statute. So we think the best way to do it is, and that was one of the criticisms we received last spring, is the legislature, in addition to the funding, have they considered the creation of a new division? So our approach is to ask for the introduction of a bill that would create a new division. That'd be no funding tied to it. We have the funding right now in the governor's budget for this program as it exists now.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you going through the legislation part. And we can talk more about the structure, I guess,
sure,
of it. But the funding, I just want to make sure that the additional funding, you would like to have it no matter if the restructuring happens or
absolutely
not. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking under food safety and lodging. How often are we inspecting restaurants and hotels and lodgings?
It's my understanding, and I can double check this, but they go to every place at least once a year. But we respond to complaints, and if there are issues when we go, we will come back more frequently.
Okay, thank you. That's better, because before it was a lot longer, I think, when I asked this question several years ago, so that's good.
Yeah.
The other thing with food, my husband went to the grocery store yesterday, and when you talked about meat,
yes,
the only meat that was actually available was chicken wings. And I think he said he saw 2 packs of thighs, but that was it. Are we having a shortage on delivery, or what would be causing that? Because then I checked with my friend, and she said they didn't have meat, and they were totally different grocery stores.
There's been some recent supply chain problems. We've got the volume, and I think it has to do as much with, you know, the processing and distribution. It's there. It's similar to the issues we faced in the spring of 2020, but not near as big a scale.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Prahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I appreciate that. I'd like to go back to the meat and poultry where you've on these inspected facilities, and you've added 17, and that's stretching your your staffing, and I see that you're looking at trying to increase that. How hard, you know, if we get another 20 operators, you're going to have some more people, aren't you?
Oh yes, yes. And we're struggling now with the existing staff, existing number of facilities, because we want to be able to work with the establishment on the day that they process that best fits their schedule, and not vice versa, say we can only be there on Friday morning and they have to make arrangements. So we want to be completely responsive, and that usually means if somebody's ill or vacancy, we have several vacancies. If you know of anybody who wants to apply for a meat inspector, we've got some positions open.
Plenty of positions?
Yes, maybe get some more money too.
Right. And I know this doesn't really affect the state inspected ones, Mr. Secretary, but most of the small processors they're still booked out a full year in advance.
Yes, those who do custom work,
yes.
Most of them are a year in advance if you have an animal or two that you want to take to them. And that's problematic for those producers who, because of the pandemic and they see the interest in people who want to buy direct. I've seen producers say, well, you know, I've got the product. If I can work with my local plant to process them, then I can market this and we can have a partnership arrangement. But they can't do it if they're not assured to get in for a year or more. Right. So we just need more capacity.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Leader.
Committee, are there any further questions? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the work and the information, and good to see some good results. Wanted to commend a number of things that are there, including the work on mental health, and reflecting on that a little bit, looking at where we are, what we can learn, and how we might want to look at that going forward, and what resources you might need to make sure we're prepared for that. Over time, we've become more isolated on the farm as people are no longer on every 80 or quarter across the state. And I think during COVID, it was instructive. My life didn't change in the summer of 2020. It was the same distance. But I think we saw that isolation show the problems in other areas of the population where that came into play. But that's one factor that is increasing. And one I'm particularly worried about is some of the good news, bad news that we have. The volatility in commodity prices has created great opportunity, and I somewhat enjoy that. But it is also very stressful in knowing where you are. And had you asked me a year ago if I could be profitable at $5 corn, I would have told you absolutely. But I cannot tell you that today. I don't know if I will lose money at $5 corn, $5.40 corn. And it's because of the input prices. And there's a couple of things I want to look at with that. As that creates the stress, I will need to buy nitrogen by April or May, and I don't know where that price is going to be. So I am double to triple the cost. So consider $400 a unit to $1,200 a unit that I have to figure out how to make work. And here's the next piece I want to look at. As we look to our other policies, as we change tax policy and potentially make that input taxable for sales tax, and I know the governor's bill actually exempts those ag inputs, but now adding sales tax on that $1,200 a unit input for nitrogen is 1/3, just the sales tax, of the cost I would have planned on a year ago at $400. And the stress that that would add, which we don't even know about yet, is something I'm just concerned about as we look at all of the moving pieces we have in policy and how that can play out and perhaps exacerbate some stresses and make it even harder to calculate whether I can be profitable at these great commodity prices, which are driving the value of our export, but might be undermining the value of our net incomes. So have we got the resources that we need to continue to both think through the impact of all those policies and how we move through it?
Well, I certainly think so. I mean, I haven't heard anyone suggest we need to put those inputs back on. In fact, I think many of them were never, ever taxed when the sales tax was first implemented. But you're right, that there'd be a big outcry if someone had suggested we need to look at that. But I think probably on tax policy, it's probably largely driven by federally, and the one that you hear a lot about is state taxes. And there's that stress, and there's the stress of how do I transition this to the next generation, not just on the tax front, but just the economic certainty.
Representative Rogers.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I had to step out and talk to the folks at home. So I told them what I was doing.
That's
so
priority.
They cut that short. Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chairman, thank you for just a moment. I just want to kind of publicly thank you, your team, and the response after the fires. As the chairman said, you're kind of prepared, but when I popped over that first hill and saw that, it was a gut punch. It was an absolute gut punch. And, thank God it wasn't one of our bigger communities that had a lot of houses like we saw in our friends out in Colorado. But I'm also heartened to what I saw with those of us in state government kind of coming together. There wasn't politics. We didn't talk politics. We didn't care. We were helping neighbors. And 3 days after that fire, I got in my old pickup and I started driving. I went over to Rooks County, one of my counties, and then zigzagged back and forth and ended up in Paradise. More than one way or the other. And you get out there where you can't go anymore because there's still power lines that are down. You still see the devastation of the livestock. You see power poles still smoldering. And you see farmhouses where 4 and 5 generations of folks have lived and raised families. But what I'm heartened by, though, is maybe the neighbor didn't lose everything, but the neighbor made sure that their stuff was secure, and they went to go help their neighbor. And really, it wasn't a deal where people sat around and said, government, come save us. There's a role for the government in all this. But it's neighbor versus neighbor, or neighbor helping neighbor. And that's one of the things, of all the things going on in our world right now, if you all could have been part there and see that. Go through Paradise, the little Methodist church. There was full of stuff from all over. Without question, people came to deliver hay, to deliver supplies. And you go down to the grain elevator, and there are literally dozens of trucks hauling cattle back and forth. I tried to get out of the way because they were still moving cows, to try to find some place to get them. But I just want to personally thank you for your leadership and getting the governor out there and spending the day and talking to folks, and also for you, Mr. Chairman, and all of us that were able to hopefully finally, as we've done this the last couple of fires, we've maybe finally got it to where we don't have to do this every time, because it's going to happen again. It's just because that's the nature of the business. Just thank you for what you, Kelsey, and others. I thought we had a good meeting in Natoma. Natoma of all places. A high school gym that was filled up with producers wanting answers, and so I'm just glad that we were able to respond to that. So. That's what I have for that.
Thank
But I
you.
have another question, so I don't know if you want to, you don't have to necessarily comment about that, but I wanted to.
Well, yeah, I would just echo the impact, and probably the hardest time was talking to those people who lost not only their livestock but their homes. We met with one that was, this was on was the day of the Natoma meeting, so that was about a week after they'd lost their home. And he started out and said, you know, thank God we didn't have any funerals because their son just about got, it's amazing, a miracle their son made it out trying to fight it. And that's is amazing. I mean, it's too bad for the one person in that immediate area that lost their life. But if you look at the homes and the 80-mile-an-hour winds and brought that through, that's the only person who lost their life. But talking to those families that lost everything was it was heartening. The one thing too that, and I haven't checked on this lately, but I was encouraged that you know, Department of Revenue said, hey, you know, people haven't thought about birth certificates, deeds, all that stuff that they've lost. You know, you can get a birth certificate, not going to charge you, get a birth certificate, marriage license, all the documentation that you are going to need, you know, next time if you get a loan or do some kind of business. So I think all state agencies are trying to be as helpful as we can in that area. And if you hear of anything, let us know.
I'll be quick. And you may have been answered, but I guess looking to the future, I saw a report that came out on dealing for the federal level on the tariff, the retaliation between countries, and Kansas was listed right behind a couple of the I states that took the biggest hit when it comes to exports and the dollars lost, especially when it comes to soybeans. How quickly and can we recover from that? Because I know, you know, we're coming off another banner year of farm income, but the futures does not look very good. So how can we, what is there something KDA can do to help boost the bottom line of farmers as we're looking at unprecedented input costs and maybe not the strongest markets, depending, because there's some geopolitical things that are now being thrown into it that we're all a little antsy about.
Well, I think that's why we always want to continue to find new trading partners. You want to be diverse in your export portfolio, if you would, because if we have some tiffs with the country, we're not totally relying upon them. And we're a member of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, and that's one of their mission is to connect states with other countries, particularly, you know, Canada and Mexico, trying to continue to sustain a really good relationship, but maybe in emerging markets in other countries. And so we'll continue to be engaged in that and try to find you know, new outlets or increase. We'd like to increase, not just sustain our exports.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I forgot this one my last time. On the new lab, did you guys own the building out at Forbes, or was that leased? And
It was leased.
it was leased, okay. So you just let that go. And then I assume that the new lab is leased through the foundation?
Correct.
KSU Foundation? Okay.
Correct. And if you look, you'll see a huge increase in our rent. The first year was rent-free. That was the agreement with the foundation. So we have finished that free year. Now we're paying rent to the K-State Foundation for that building.
How does it compare to the old?
It's more.
It's more, okay.
Yeah, and we pay utilities. Our rent agreement at Forbes was included rent, including utilities. So we found out, we've been trying to do a lot of energy audits to figure out how we can be a little more efficient on that front.
Is it, so how much more capacity do you have now than you did before?
Oh, I don't know if we increased our capacity so much as it's just more efficient, and the building we were leasing was not really built or designed to be a lab, and was rather old and dilapidated. So I think it's going to increase. It will increase our accuracy and our efficiency.
Okay. Yeah, I was out there once, and I think it was a machine shed that, that turned into a lab. So, okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, committee, any further questions for the secretary? All right, I'm not seeing any. Thank you for being here this morning and giving us an update on the largest economic driver for the state of Kansas, which is agriculture. We are an agriculture state, and I want to thank you. And I also, to kind of add to Representative Rogers' comments, I want to thank you personally for everything that you did. You took my calls on Saturday and Sunday numerous times when I was calling you shortly after the fire, and so I personally want to thank you for everything you did, because the individuals in Paradise are people that I've known my entire life. I'm very close to them, so I was trying to do everything I possibly could to try to ease everything they were going through, because in some aspects, their lives, their livelihood, their business was shattered. And I just want to personally thank you, because I think on that Sunday right after the fire, you and I talked probably 4 or 5 times that day.
Yes.
And you always took my call. And then that Monday you came out and visited. And I just want to personally thank you for everything that you did for assistance for those that were affected in my area and Representative Rogers' area.
Well, thank you for those remarks. And I know the folks there appreciate both you and Representative Rogers' attention and help and support as well.
All right. Thank you. Representative Ballard.
Would it be appropriate, I mean, honestly, truly, we don't do it very often, to applaud the help of the department for everything they did?
I think that would be.
Make sure we recognize all of our staff, too, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to probably the third economic driver for the state of Kansas, which is the oil and gas industry. And so I would ask Ed Cross, the president of the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association, to committee. Welcome to committee, Mr. Cross.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And it's a pleasure to follow Secretary Beam. You know, the oil and gas producers are very much like the farmers. You know, there's small independent businesses out there, and it was a pleasure to follow the Secretary Beam. And it's also, thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the oil and gas industry and where we're at, kind of the state of the oil and gas industry. As he said, I'm Edward Cross. I'm president of the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association. And our association has over 3,000 members across the state, and we're the lead state and national advocate for the Kansas oil and gas industry. I don't know if, I don't see them here, but also Tom Pallas represents the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association, and Kent Eccles also represents American Petroleum Institute. You have a packet of information, and I'm not going through that whole packet, but it's got a lot of detailed data on some of the things I'm going to talk about, like the strategic analysis and different issues, and you'll have that as a reference material. When we say we're the independent oil and gas industry, independents are people who drill and produce oil and natural gas. We don't generate or market the end products, so we just sell those to the purchasers. And so we're small independents or small businesses. And if you look at it nationally, small independent producers paid $30.7 billion in taxes last year, and the entire direct, indirect, and induced economics of small independent producers generated $131 billion in federal and state taxes last year, and that's expected to go to $189 billion this year. One of our studies we find that every $1 million of CapEx that independents spend results in $1.1 million of total taxes generated, along with the creation of 39 jobs. Also, every $1 million of CapEx that independents use result in $2.4 million of direct and $5.1 million of overall contribution to gross domestic product. In Kansas, oil and gas is produced in 89 of the 105 counties, so we are a statewide industry. In 2021, 78% of the value of the industry came from oil production and 22% from natural gas production. Average well in Kansas makes about 2 barrels of oil per day, and average natural gas well makes about 27,000 cubic feet of gas per day, but still a $2.2 billion industry that supports over 100,000 jobs, $3 billion in family income, and over $1.4 billion in state and local taxes. Direct employment in the oil and gas industry in Kansas is 13,800. Folks that are paid $940 million in wages for average wage of about $60,000 per year. In oil and gas, where oil and gas is found in some areas, the state that represented a quarter of the jobs in some of those counties and 60 to 70% of the property tax. like all industries and businesses, you know, our industry was greatly affected in 2020 by the COVID pandemic. But we were also affected by a crude oil supply shock that was also going on at the same time. If you look at 2020, and I'll talk a little bit just briefly about 2020 so we can see where we're at in 21 and then 22. But in 2020, demand was already beginning to fall in January and February of 2020. And I say demand, I'm talking about crude oil demand. And OPEC decided that they were going to cut production to keep stabilized prices. However, in February of that year, Russia decided that they were not going to join the production cuts because they were going to try to exploit that situation to harm U.S. producers and gain market share. Unwilling to cede that market share, Saudi Arabia decided to increase their production by 27% as well. And that's caused a huge crude oil supply shock worldwide. And in April that year, we actually saw in some places negative crude oil prices, if you will. So, you know, I think here in Kansas, our lowest price in April of 2020 was 25 cents a barrel. I can just tell you, I don't even have to ask operators. There's no one can make money at 25 cents a barrel. But anyway, that's but right after that, when they saw the COVID, it was going to greatly destroy demand for crude oil, OPEC decided to make a 10 million barrel a day cut in production. And U.S. production also fell 1.7 million barrels a day. So 2020 was a tumultuous year for our industry. The COVID pandemic, as well as the supply shock, destroyed about 30% of global oil demand. And operators in Kansas began laying down rigs and shutting in production, and they cut CapEx by as much as 60%. You know, deferred drilling and other activities. Royalty payments to royalty owners, which is often landowners, that fell by $400 million. Industry lost $810 million in oil and gas output. And there was many layoffs. 20 to 30% of the workforce was laid off in the production sector, as much as 55 to 60% in the service sector. And that resulted in a loss of $341 million in family income across the state. Operators shut in nearly 5,000 wells in 2020, resulting in production falling in 2020 by 12.5%, oil production, and natural gas falling by 10.8%. So that brings us up to 2021, and OPEC production cuts. Well, they say I said they cut production by 10 million barrels a day, so they were going to reduce their cuts to 5.8 million barrels a day, which we call that a production increase. But they're going to reduce their cuts from 10 million barrels a day to 5.8 million in the first half of 2021. And now they intend to phase out all production cuts entirely by September of 2022, which has an impact on what projections for crude oil prices will be going forward. Talk about that in a minute. Crude oil demand rose 6.6% in 2021, and as vaccination rates increase, many of them project that we'll see oil demand recovery in the first half, hopefully, of 2022. When you look at natural gas, there was a slow rebound from Tropical Storm Nicholas and Hurricane Ida. There was some globally tight supplies of natural gas, and some bad energy policies resulted in natural gas prices hovering near a 7-year high. What's interesting is over 50% of U.S. homes are heated by natural gas, and those that use electric heat pay for natural gas prices as 38% of total natural gas consumption goes into providing electricity. U.S. natural gas production grew 11% from 2017 to 2018, but some of the anti-oil and gas policies at the federal level in particular has created a situation where U.S. production is stagnant. And as a result, natural gas prices rose 94% in 2021. That pullback in U.S. natural gas output was exacerbated by a global shortfall of natural gas that's driving prices to record highs in Europe and Asia. So economic recovery from the sudden and severe contraction of 2020 started in 2021 and is expected to continue in 2022. So we see both the U.S. and Kansas gross domestic product projected to increase. But it should be, like you talked about, inflationary pressures, and those could offset some of that nominal growth, resulting in real growth that may be something less. When you look at oil production in Kansas, in calendar year 2019, we made 90,000 barrels a day. That's what Kansas produced. And before that, we made well over 100,000. In calendar year 2020, the year the pandemic hit, our production dropped to 79,000 barrels of oil per day. And in 2021, we feel like we've made a recovery because there's been more activity, but it looks like our production will be about 76,000 barrels a day, which is still down 3.9% from 2020. Kansas natural gas production has also dropped 7% in calendar year 2021. Hopefully, we're going to see some improvements in production in 2022 as prices recover, but it will be some time before we would see 90 to 100,000 barrels a day again. So that's all affects oil and gas tax collections. When you look at Kansas collected 45% less oil and gas severance tax and 9.4% less ad valorem tax in calendar year 2020 than 2019. And in 2021, you look at improved market condition, it looks like Kansas is going to collect about $20 million more in oil and gas severance tax and $10 million more in ad valorem tax in 2021 compared to 2020. In 2020, our permits were down 54%, permits to drill oil and gas wells, so down 54% from 2019. And the rigs were down 59%. But in 2021, the KCC has issued 1,292 drilling permits compared to the 560 they issued in 2020, so that's up 130%. And our rigs in 2021 averaged about 28 rigs running each month compared to 11 running each month in 2020. So we're seeing some increases on that. So when you look at what companies are doing, they're certainly trying to optimize their cost structures and work through that. And in Kansas, improved productivity is less about improved technology and more about better application of existing technology. So they've been working to try to stay afloat. When we look at 2022, there's a lot of uncertainty out there as to, what's going to be the responses and the economic impact of different strains of COVID and things like that. So those are still going to affect 2022. Kansas, when you look at prices, crude oil prices, in 2020, the crude oil was $53 a barrel in January of 2020. And then due to all those actions I talked about from Saudi Arabia and Russia, it dipped to 25 cents a barrel by April of that year. And then they began to recover thereafter. And in 2020, they reached, $35 by the end of the year. And in 2021, we saw a steady increase in that as OPEC cuts remained, and there was a steady draw as demand increased. Kansas crude oil prices in 2021 averaged $58.11 a barrel. And in 2022, it changes constantly. The latest Energy Information Administration's short-term energy outlook, which was released on January 11th, 2022, they still express supply uncertainty due to COVID and other things, but they project Kansas crude oil prices for 2022 will average $61 a barrel. Now, I can tell you that was a January 11th report. Whenever I saw that they do a report every month, when in December they were projecting Kansas crude oil prices to be $52 a barrel, and now they project 61. Today's price, when I looked at before I came over here, is actually posted yesterday, is $77.25 a barrel. So, but they're looking at some of the demand destruction and the fact that OPEC has said they're going to reduce those cuts to zero by September 2022. So, when you look at some of the challenges of our industry, and some of those and many of those reflect not only what you just heard from the agriculture industry, but many industries out there is, with labor, for example, on that. But one of the main ones that we talk about now is finding a solution to high electric rates in Kansas. Kansas has one of the lowest electric generation prices in the U.S., but by far the highest retail electric rates in the Midwest. Kansas consumers spent more than $775 million more on electricity than they did just 10 years ago. And that's the highest operating cost for most oil and gas wells. 30 to 50% of well expenses are electric costs. So we've supported studies on the electric rates and testified before committees and things like that in the past, and we'll continue to work with legislators and others. As I mentioned, labor is a problem. I know I just talked to a producer yesterday that they drilled a well so far this year, but what's holding them back now is the drilling companies are shorthanded on their crew. So you can still get a drilling crew, but it's shorthanded, and that makes everything take longer. Same thing with well service units. They go out there with a short crew, and it just takes them longer. If you're paying by the hour, it just costs more. So they're just waiting for them to get more people. And I don't think that is not a unique problem to the oil and gas industry. I think every industry is experiencing those kinds of things. You know, whenever I look at some of the other challenges that we have here, it certainly is energy policy that, you know, and whether it be state or federal, but we look at inexpensive energy is necessary for the economic advancement and for improving the staggering economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Increasing taxes and regulations results in fewer jobs because businesses spend their resources on tax burdens and regulatory compliance instead of job creation. So when tax expenditures and regulatory costs increase more than the real economy, the results are destructive to economic growth. And you know, I don't know that that's always realized, especially at the federal level, that we have those things going on. Kansas oil and gas operations will likely remain conventional small operations that will be tweaked by technology, as we have in the past. And the bottom line is that the low-cost producers across the United States will establish a fair price for oil based on how low costs can go, and they use a lot of technology for that. So Kansas producers will be challenged to find cost efficiencies in this market dynamic because the low-cost producers are the ones that stay in business. This last year, we've been dealing with a lot of issues. A lot of our biggest issues come from the federal level. And so, you know, we have been addressing a lot of federal policies that have been attacking oil and gas. And you know, we met with 19 key federal policymakers, in addition to our own congressional delegation, of course, and on 4 occasions in 2021, including with key senators like Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, as well as the House Energy Action Team, U.S. House Energy Action Team, and the House Democrat Oil and Gas Caucus. And we talked to them about how some of these federal proposals contain enormously damaging policies that could impose crushing new energy costs on Americans who can least afford to pay. We also talked to them about EPA methane regulations, which is a big issue for us. It's a very important issue. And we're part of an industry coalition that is working on that. And the whole idea behind these environmental policies is to take fossil fuels away from the people. But in reality, we are nowhere near having a replacement for those. So sooner or later, people will figure that out. So we've been providing comments and technical support for, as well as cost of compliance information and comments filed with the different regulatory agencies, including EPA. Here at the state level, you know, you have our legislative agenda in your packets there, and that lays out what's important to our members on energy tax and regulatory issues. But basically, you know, we support the least restrictive method of regulations that supports the goal of protecting the public without limiting business activity. We support measures that reduce government spending instead of increasing the cost of doing business through tax increases. We support tax policies that treat all energy sources equally, allowing market demand to drive efficiencies. And we support efforts to limit or block federal regulation which overreach and impose undue expense and regulatory burden on the Kansas oil and gas industry. We would oppose measures designed to stop oil and gas production and mandates and policies that increase costs when sourcing energy, or oppose policies picking winners and losers among energy sources. So what we've been doing with our own members, you know, we have webinars. As a matter of fact, we have our first webinar this year next week. We had 2 series of webinars last year, 17 webinars. We usually average, I think we average 109 folks at each one. We had our couple of conventions. Our mid-year meeting was in Garden City last year. We had 350 people. That was an in-person live meeting. Our annual convention was in Wichita. We do 700 people. We heard from our 70th U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. We still rigorously engage at state and federal level to create a stable and predictable political and regulatory environment. And we're committed to being a positive, credible, and proactive voice for the industry, promoting respectful dialogue and education. We also work with a number of our other groups, national groups, Independent Petroleum Association of America, Domestic Energy Producers Alliance, and others. So when you go forward, I always like to close by talking about, let's look at what powers the United States today, and this is from the Energy Information Administration. You know, it's U.S. energy consumption by source in 2021. Oil makes up 35% of that, natural gas 34%, coal 10%, wind and solar is 4%. So when you look at that, 79% of energy consumption in the U.S. is fossil fuels. So when you look at what will power the world in the future, the Energy Information Administration estimates that by 2050, world energy demand will increase by 28%. So the pie is getting bigger, and 69% of that demand will be supplied by fossil fuels. And so even breaking that down further, 50% of that energy, global energy needs in 2050 will be supplied by oil and gas. So global oil consumption is projected to grow 14% between now and 2035. So while the ambitious pledges from various international bodies and governments would suggest that the energy transition is near, the gap between theory and reality is vast. Fossil fuels supplied 84% of global energy needs in 2020, and it's likely going to be decades before an energy transition can take place. So that energy transition may have begun, but there's still a very long way before fossil fuel dominance will be truly challenged. So in closing, let me say that the oil and gas industry shares an energy future vision with the public. We and our families live and work right here in Kansas, and we care much about the environment and our economy as anybody. In Cuyahoga, what we're focused on is helping the industry with value reconstruction as we looked at recovery, stability, and growth. We've lived through several ugly downturns in the past, and we know that patience, persistence, insight, and innovation pay off. And we look forward to working with legislators and other industry folks to take stock and prepare for brighter days ahead. When I look at that, our mission in the oil and gas industry is to empower people, improve lives, and inspire success. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity, and I would stand for the questions if there's any questions.
All right. Thank you for being here, Ed. If you could just let the committee know in regards to oil production, where does the state of Kansas rank with the other oil-producing states in the nation?
I think we're ranked 11th in oil production and 14th or 15th in natural gas production. So, of the 32 states that produce out there. So, we're not nearly as much as North Dakota or Texas, but we're still, one of the top oil and gas producing states.
All right, thank you. I know it's been a very volatile industry because we're personally involved in the oil industry, and in April of 2020, when the oil price was trading at negative $57, I kept telling my father in his office to stop taking his blood pressure because we were in the midst of negotiations, and it was a very trying time, obviously. And you said, the industry has been through these patches in the past, and obviously the price has continued to rise, which usually when you see higher oil prices, you see more production or more drilling going on through the state of Kansas. But I think you were talking about the labor shortage. So obviously you said that's kind of prevalent in all industries throughout the state and the nation. In your opinion, what caused the labor shortages?
I mean, when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of people that were laid off, and so I think people that were there either, are cautious about getting back into the industry, especially if they found another job, because they don't want to have to go through that again, if they think the oil prices are going to drop. And, like our activity is up this year, but producers are still cautious about oil prices. I mean, you got all kinds of signs out there to say, well, they may drop, and so they're not, while they're drilling more. Last year our production was 79,000. This year is 76,000 barrels a day. That's a significant, because we have 40,000 oil wells in Kansas, and all of those are declining by about 11% every year. So even if it takes a lot of drilling just to keep production flat, much less increase it. And so, so the labor shortage is it's like for many industries, it's just a matter of finding people that can get out there and do that work. That's hard work, let me tell you. Well servicing and drilling rigs, I mean, don't let anybody kid you, that's hard work when you get out there. Now, they make good wages doing that, but it's difficult to find people to get in there and stick with that. And so that I don't know what the answers are to all of that. I wish I knew, but I don't know if that really answered your question.
No, it does, and I just kind of wanted to kind of evaluate, in regards to new drilling, you got to have a crew pretty much 24 hours a day for that drilling, and if you don't have the crew, it's going to take longer to drill that new well, and then you got to complete it, and then you have the servicing, and if the labor shortages just cascades through the entire industry, as it does in other industries across our economy.
And to drill a well, it actually takes 3 crews, because one crew doesn't work 24 hours. They'll have 3 8-hour crews. So like, whenever they do that, even the well service units, where they, in drilling, they might have to round trip it, meaning you're going to pull all the pipe out and change the drill bit or something on that, and you have to lay all of that down and then put the new drill bit on it and then run it all back in. And if you're short a crew, that takes longer, and you're paying by the hour. It's not that they're not working hard. They are. They just don't have enough people to go as fast as they normally do. Same thing with well service units. They have to tail rods or take something out, and they only have 2-man crew instead of a 3-man crew. It just takes longer to do that, and you're paying by the hour. So operators will look at that and say, I'm going to, and the other thing I might add is operators have said that they have a lot of wait time, like if they want to stimulate some of their wells out there, not necessarily drill them, but take existing wells and work on those. They'll call up and it's a wait time just to get the services, simply because they don't have nearly many units out there, whether it be a drill stem test or anything else, because they have, they have so many crews and they got a lot of people asking for work, so you get on a list and you have to wait for that service, and that slows things down.
All right, thank you. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I appreciate it's on number 9, the graph on page 9. In the Energy Council, we've seen a lot of deviations of that graph, and I think it's important for everyone to see that, as you said, there may be a lot of hype out there about renewables taking over and all that, but we are years and years. I even actually always think that they're always a little more optimistic on the renewables as far as where they are and where they're going to be in 50 or 40 years. But there's no doubt about it that we're a long ways from ever replacing oil and gas. We may see some decline in the United States, but worldwide, oil and gas usage is going up. And so I think it's always important for us to realize that when we're doing policy. And unfortunately, that's being lost in, I think, Washington and some other states. But as 2022 gets underway, and you've answered this a little bit, I guess, with what the chairman was saying, if things do continue to look good as far as pricing and everything, what do you see as far as the ability for the independent producers to do? Are they going to mostly go back into a lot of those shut-in wells and start putting them back in service first before they do a lot more drilling, or do you think it's going to be a combination, or mostly going back and trying to drill more wells?
Yeah, I think it will be a combination, but like when you say you go back in, they shut 5,000 wells down in 2020. All of those are not running yet. But it's not like if you shut a well down and then you come back to it, you don't just turn the switch on and it just starts pumping again just like it was. So most of the time it requires servicing, meaning you have to pull it, clean it out, and change the pump in it or something. So they'll do a lot of that, especially the ones that they feel are their best wells. Many of them may also have some drilling plans. So it's been down over the last couple of years, and they may have worked up some plans on drilling some of those things. And it also depends on the lease. Some leases they have require that a well be drilled every so often. So they'll make sure they'll drill some of those wells to make sure they continue that leasing. But I do think there's some folks out there that have some projects that they would like to drill. And right now, like you say, labor and availability of services may be limiting that activity.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So there was.
And by the way, thanks for that. That graph is from the Energy Information Administration, and I will say, renewable energies are projected to grow dramatically, between now and 2050. It's just there's still going to be a smaller part of the overall pie.
Right, and the problem with that growth, though, is that there's going to be a time that's going to eventually get to a point where we are looking at food production and the renewables as far as land use, because in order to get to that point, we're talking a huge amount of land in this portion of the United States, not just Kansas, but this whole area that is being used up by either solar farms or renewable or windmills. And I'm not against either one of them. It's just that the reality is that in order to get to that point, it's a huge amount of number of facilities. But you mentioned something, and I can't remember now what it was I was going to ask, so.
I'm sorry about
No,
that.
it's okay. I was thinking about it, and then I forgot. But I do appreciate you coming. Oil and gas is huge in my area, and we have seen I've seen it personally. I'm not in the oil and gas business, but I certainly do have a few wells that no longer getting anything from. So I would love to see that. But, my whole area has just been devastated. Oh, I remember now what it was. So in the... Talk long enough. I talk long enough, I'll remember it, won't I? Maybe about 5-6 years ago, we saw a lot of acquisitions from independent oil and gas companies of these larger from these larger companies that were abandoning these fields. Is that pretty well been? You think that's pretty well saturated now, or do you still think that maybe in the next couple of years we're going to still see some more acquisitions by the independents from some of these bigger companies here in Kansas?
Certainly. I think they're still looking at those kinds of things. It has to just be the right economics. I know there's out there looking even in the Hugoton natural gas field as some of those larger companies are looking at some of their properties, and they may look at those as uneconomic now, and the smaller producers may be able to go in there and make it better. And so, you can just see that as the smaller producers keep coming in more there, not only there, but other parts of Kansas too. I know there's oil production in south central Kansas that folks will look at. So I think that's always something that they'll be looking at.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. We always appreciate when they come in, but it's like anything. These small businesses are the driving force in just about any of our businesses here in Kansas, and it's always great to see our small producers be able to increase their ability, and they're going to be here. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're not going to decide, well, Kansas is not big enough anymore, we're going to move to another state or whatever. So
they live here with their families.
That's right. They live here and work here and raise their family here. So appreciate it. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick. Mr. Cross, thanks for being here. I enjoy seeing the map of Kansas where there's a lot of dots in the 110th district. So I guess this may be a little outside the box, but in agriculture, it started out as a buzzword of sustainability. Mm-hmm. And I guess I want to talk about it in the oil and gas industry. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you're addressing as you look at long range, and have you all started to maybe try to define what sustainability is in your industry, and as we look at trying to get more out of the resource that we have? And we've talked a lot about shortages and other things, but without dramatic. I mean, I know there are changes all the time for technology and other thing, but is that something that can, is sustainability something that is being discussed in the oil and gas industry?
Absolutely. I mean, not only here in Kansas, but in other places too. And that is a buzzword that is a strange word to me that be called sustainability. But that's there's ESG standards that companies have looked at. Producers, what we feel is those are great opportunities for us to talk about the environmental compliance and actions and stewardship, basically, that our industry has done for many years, and we like to show that out there, so that whenever you look at green standards, sometimes you just got to look at them more closely, because sometimes they're more about raising revenue than they are about actually protecting the environment. So we take that opportunity. You're not going to say that's going to go away, but we got to take that opportunity to show the environmental stewardship and the actions that our industry has already done, and many companies are doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, any further questions for Mr. Cross? All right, not seeing any. Thank you for being here and giving us an update on the oil and gas industry in the state of Kansas. Committee, that actually is the end of the items that we have on our agenda today. We will not be having a meeting tomorrow, nor is there a meeting scheduled on Monday, so that'll allow you to commute back in to session on Monday. And actually, I was having a discussion about that with Representative Prale this morning. He was thanking me for not having a meeting on Monday, because starting right now, tentatively, just to let everybody know, starting February 3rd, is when we're anticipating to have our first budget report outs from our budget chairman. So when that time comes, we'll be having meetings all 5 days of the week. So until then, we'll try to limit the amount of committee that we're going to have, because once that process starts, as everybody knows, except for Representative Woodard, you'll learn this when that starts happening. It's very intense, and we have a very crucial deadline in order to meet all those budget report outs and then finally work the budget bill for the House. So until Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., we are adjourned.